Thank you. Good morning. My name is Matt Almy from the Department of Finance, otherwise known as the other Matt, not the primary Matt, but the other Matt. The Cap and Trade Investment Plan, which was released last month, recommends that priorities for future investments be informed by the state's broader climate strategy, including requirements established in legislation and the governor's recent executive order, which established a greenhouse gas emission reduction target for the state of 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. The key climate change strategies include increasing electricity derived from renewable sources to 50%, reducing petroleum use in cars and trucks by up to 50%, doubling the rate of energy efficiency savings in existing buildings and making heating fuels cleaner, reducing the release of short-lived climate pollutants such as methane and black carbon, and increasing carbon sequestration on farms and rangelands and in forests and wetlands. The governor's budget supports these climate change strategies by proposing a $3.1 billion cap and trade expenditure plan. And to underscore Secretary Rodriguez's opening remarks, the priorities for the cap and trade budget proposal were informed by three primary considerations. First is the state's broader climate strategy. This includes reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. The proposed expenditures in the budget proposal were designed to align specifically with the 6 climate change strategy pillars. Number 2, it was informed by the investment plan. The budget proposal was informed by public comments received through 11 public meetings and workshops as part of the development of the investment plan. For example, after listening to comments received at public workshops encouraging greater local control of decisions, the budget proposes $100 million for a new transformational climate communities program to support local climate actions in the state's top 5% of disadvantaged communities. And the third primary consideration is truly to focus on benefits to disadvantaged communities. The governor's budget under the governor's budget proposal, at least 30% of the cap and trade expenditures are proposed for disadvantaged communities. So I'm going to stop there for the overview and would be happy to answer any questions.
Great. All right, let's bring it back to the panel. Do we have questions of our panelists? Go ahead, Mr. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess it's looking at the investment plan is where I'm trying to understand. And, you know, we're talking about billions of dollars this year and as we move forward. I guess I'm looking, and I know in a few minutes we'll hear from the LAO's office, and I just appreciate the analysis that they did and the questions that they've raised regarding the plan and the analysis that went into it, the thoughts that went into it, the priorities that went into it. And I wondered if you could look at, because as we move forward, we have to look at how we got there. And especially is there a way of understanding which cap and trade investment plan or category so far has been the most cost effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And, you know, are we looking at, you know, high-speed rail, housing, sustainable communities, transit rail, or some of the legislative discretion that we've seen around small programs? It seems that in this, everyone wants a little piece of the pie. And, you know, where are we getting the best bang for the buck so far?
Yes, thank you for the question. So as part of the cap and trade implementing legislation, there's a requirement that the Department of Finance submit a report to the legislature in the March timeframe that identifies the outcomes, which includes metrics on specific GHG emission reductions, as well as other co-benefits that were said. So that is a report that is due next month, and we are working on that. I will say that the one program I think that comes to mind in terms of cost effectiveness is CalRecycle's waste diversion program. I think that's been kind of understood as one of the more cost effective programs in terms of dollars spent per emissions reduced, and as a result, the governor's budget includes an increase of spending on the waste diversion program. It's now proposed at $100 million. But I would also like to just emphasize that cost effectiveness, although that's one lens, that is not the only lens that we necessarily looked at. We also look kind of more holistically and more broadly about other policy benefits associated with it. So let me use kind of the forest health proposal as kind of an illustrative example of this point. So if you look at the forest health proposal, there's kind of a 5-dimensional policy benefit to it. One is the fact that you're making the state's forests, increasing the carbon sequestration capability of the state's forests. So there's a emissions GHG sequestration benefit there. In addition, by making the forests more and removing dead and dying trees, you're reducing the carbon emissions, the potential emissions associated with wildfires. Okay, so not only are you sequestering, you're reducing the risk of black carbon going into the atmosphere. Okay, third, you're reducing the state's overall wildfire risk, and there's public safety benefits associated with that, given the magnitude of the dead and dying trees. Fourth, you're, by utilizing the biomass that it's associated with the removal of the dead and dying trees, you're improving the state's renewable energy benefits there associated with the energy sector. And then fifth, you're creating some job creation opportunities in rural communities. So although there's the cost effectiveness lens, which is an important lens, we also try to take a more holistic view of all of the other co-benefits as well. And of course, disadvantaged communities is another lens that we look at.
And I guess what's the concern is, and I guess another question, are you comfortable with the current, the funding model, the 60%, 40% model? Does that seem to, is that something you're continuing to be comfortable with in terms of the allocations that are used, high-speed rail, obviously the housing and sustainable communities, transit and rail, and the formula? Is that still something that you're comfortable with, or do you see, I guess where I'm going with this is when 90% of the revenue is going to be coming from fuel sources and transportation sector and fuel sector in that sense, and with the goal of 50%, reduction over the next, 15 years and beyond, are we going to meet that goal without looking at providing, as I see it, greater resources into public transit, trying to create opportunities in those disadvantaged communities for people to be able to get out of their car, be able to get to work, and provide a lower cost opportunity for them through public regional transit that I think is a resource that we should use some of that funding that is coming from the fuel sectors today in a greater amount than we have in the past.
Yes, I agree completely with your point. So just to kind of underscore, the 60% continuous appropriation, we are proposing to continue that, and it is true that a lot of that is focused in the transportation sector, which is the sector that is the highest source of GHG emissions. But the cap and trade expenditure plan that's in the budget further invests in transportation beyond the 60%. So as part of the overall transportation package, there's a $500 million proposal that aligns with the administration's transportation package, of which $400 million, again, this is above the 60% continuous appropriation, $400 million will go to Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, and another $100 million to support emission reduction activities associated with local streets and roads. In addition to that, there's the proposal is $500 million for the Air Resources Board Low Carbon Transportation Program, which provides incentive for zero-emission vehicles and rebates and such. So we agree transportation is a area of need, and that's why the proposal does make further investments beyond the continuous appropriation.
I only wanted to add one comment to that. No, just to say that I didn't mention it in my testimony, but the Air Resources Board is working on a new scoping plan to meet the 2030 targets, and I'm hoping, and I'm expecting that that document is going to be, a draft will be out in the spring, and the final will be adopted this coming autumn. And that, I think, will provide us with some better guidance in terms of even within the transportation sector, which unquestionably is the major dominant area for concern, which kinds of programs and investments are the ones that are going to be the most important in terms of getting us the emissions reduction. So I know you're going to be hearing from the legislative analyst also, but to the extent that these programs are intended to further the goals of our climate plan, I think it will be helpful to have them be guided by the scoping plan.
Let me follow up on Senator Hill's proposal, because the second investment plan talks eloquently about the forest and sequestration, but when you look at the appendix on the cap and trade expenditures, because it includes the current fiscal year that we know that we had 40%, the 40% was left on the table. The proposal here for the California Energy Commission for building retrofits and energy efficiency and energy generation is zero of that 40%. The dairy digesters and the alternative and renewable fuels is zero. Energy efficiency and water use gets a little bit of money, but if I'm reading the chart on B6, and even the Air Board, last year, or the 14-15 budget gave $200 million for clean vehicle rebates, heavy-duty hybrid buses, freight demonstration projects, light-duty pilot projects in disadvantaged community. That was cut from $200 million, at least in the 40%, to 95. So while the expenditure plan identifies these do-gooder things, I think his question is, are we getting the most bang for the buck? Should we be spending some of the money that is going into the other all-worthy projects, but these other things that look like the black carbon and these short-term benefits, at least for this current year, got nada? Am I reading this wrong?
Yeah, so let me clarify what that appendix means. So what the purpose of this appendix is just to identify what has been appropriated to date. So it's a factual historical document of what's been done to date. I think we acknowledge that the cap and trade package that ultimately didn't get enacted last year is unfinished business. So the administration proposed a May revision package that did include funding for a lot of the programs that you just identified, but unfortunately it remained unfinished business, and there was kind of what you might call a bare bones cap and trade appropriation that was made at the end of the last session that included money for water efficiency related to the drought, as well as funding to continue the zero emission rebates. So this reflects historically what has actually been appropriated in the budget to date. Okay, so that's what this table is. Then in January, the administration proposed a $3 billion cap and trade expenditure plan that does include resources for a lot of the programs that you identified that, again, did not necessarily get money appropriated last year. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes, that's Senator Hill.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish, and just as a comment, it just is the part that I see we can get the quickest benefit in those disadvantaged communities. And I look at, when I sat on the Air Resources Board under the leadership of the great Mary Nichols as our chair, and there was a study conducted for the black carbon, the coming into the Bay Area. the sad part that was determined was that the West Oakland area was receiving the most pollution blown in from the way the currents, especially from the Port of Oakland, and they're dying and getting cancer rates 5 times greater than any place else in the Bay Area. And I looked at that and saw those trucks that are idling on 880 and waiting to get into the port, and just the traffic and the congestion as that wind from 880 blowing into their area. And the more we can spend on getting people out of their cars and allowing them the opportunity for convenient public transit, which California has been deficient on historically because of our love for the automobile. Until we can make that investment, we're not going to see the reductions that we know are necessary if we're going to meet those goals. So.
Well, thank God we have Senator Leno and Senator Pavley, who are on the chair of the Budget Committee, who will be looking at these dollar amounts that are being sent. We're here, our goal here is more the policy drivers, that what's the big picture. Senator Leno, you had some questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, 2 brief questions, but I'm going to start with a brief comment. First of all, as one of the few folks who was actually here in 2006 and recognizing the stars that our delegation were in Paris, I think it's also an appropriate time to recognize that AB 32 didn't just happen. There was indeed some drama around it all. I will never forget the last caucus update that Assemblywoman Pavley gave to us. It probably was a Tuesday afternoon in any case. She said there was a stalemate with the administration and the governor was going to sign the bill. We cannot compromise anymore, and it's just not going to happen. And then 90 minutes later, he put out a press release that he was going to sign the bill.
It's always good to call bluff.
So masterfully handled. And then, of course, during these 10 years since its signing and the implementation, Chairwoman, you've probably had a few ups and downs and waves to contend with yourself, and it just needs to be noted that you have just been stalwart and steadfast and unflappable in face of all the naysayers and the doomsday predictions of our economy. And not only have they all been proven wrong, but truly the investment in this state right now as a result of AB 32 is just extraordinary. So to bring us up to today, I just recently resaw An Inconvenient Truth, which was first released in January of '06, just prior to AB 32's passage and signing. And it's fascinating to watch again, because now we have some hindsight, and it's really jarring to watch what Al Gore was suggesting at the time and to see it has all accelerated way beyond what he was imagining and suggesting at the time. So well worth seeing. With regard to the 2% centigrade, and I know that was much discussed in Paris, given the facts that we know, the rate of the melting of the polar ice caps, what's happening in parts of Antarctica, shelves dropping completely, Greenland, warming of the oceans, all of the contributing factors that we might see even greater acceleration, that there's been much discussion that maybe the 2% is not realistic. And if that is the case, does that only underscore the need to deal with mitigation all the more quickly, that it becomes not only more critical and timely, but potentially urgent? And I'm just thinking back the past month in the Bay Area, where we had some of the king tides yet again, roadways underwater in Mill Valley and detours, and there are pockets of San Francisco that with heavy rains are just regularly underwater and have been for the past 10 years. We know this isn't getting better, it is getting worse. If not the airport, but the road from San Francisco to the airport, that freeway will be submerged. How urgent is this?
That's a great question. So you're absolutely right that we're living with the effects of the past failure to deal with the emissions that are already now in the atmosphere and that are causing some of the effects that we're living with today. So we're not going to make this, we're not going to avoid adverse effects because we're already living with adverse effects. The most catastrophic effects that have been hypothesized from the climate models may be able to be averted with timely investments now. And that's the hope, is that by staying, the terminology is well under 2, so really maybe the 1.5 is the right scientific goal. And I was very proud of the Obama administration for not flinching at that language in the agreement, because that's scary stuff in terms of what it commits us to try to do, really huge cuts in emissions. This is the reason why we have been focused, the governor's been focused also on the short-lived climate pollutants, which weren't even in anybody's vocabulary as a term, you know, a year or two ago. And now we're really emphasizing that because compared with the carbon dioxide, which lives and continues to do damage as it builds up over many decades, we could have an effect in a matter of a relatively short number of years, because the methane, for example, is many times more potent as a climate gas than carbon dioxide. So for that reason, we're really pushing hard internally and will be externally as well to try to make that, put that at the top of people's agenda priorities.
And I know this is an issue that, I'm sorry.
I would just note that at the instruction of Senator Wieckowski, more work has been done on how do we respond to climate change when it does arrive here in California. The Natural Resources Agency has been working on a Safeguarding California plan that has been produced, and that work is going to continue to work. I know that the Office of Planning and Research has some additional positions to address some of the very issues that you've raised, because in spite of our best efforts in the international arena, in spite of our work to prevent climate change, we've recognized here in California that work needs to be done to prepare for the effects of climate change, be it sea level rise, be it hotter cities, be it changes to temperatures that affect agriculture here in California. So we're trying to get ahead of that curve. So a great deal of work is being done primarily within the Natural Resources Agency under Secretary Laird and the Office of Planning and Research, and Ken Alex as the director there. And we're working very closely with them through the Climate Action Team to make sure that all boards and departments here in California are working both on mitigation, adaptation as well.
And I know the chair has been very focused on mitigation, and I'm glad you make mention, Mr. Secretary, of adaptation. Given that those efforts cannot benefit from cap and trade dollars, are we looking at some way to fund what will be expensive projects, or is there a way to create some public-private partnerships? I don't know if there's any, is there profit to be found in dealing with mitigation and adaptation?
Yeah, so just to underscore that, the point that there are, as I mentioned, there's some programs where it can have multiple benefits. It is true that all of the expenditures of cap and trade funds need to have a direct emission reduction benefit. Okay, so that's, and we're committed to that, and that's the main focus here. But that doesn't mean that there aren't co-benefits associated with resilience. So let me give you, I gave you one example, which was the Healthy Forests Initiative. Making our forests more resilient by removing dead and dying trees is a resilience benefit. and it also sequesters carbon at the same time. So you can kind of achieve multiple objectives. The other multiple objective that you can kind of...
That's reflected in the governor's proposal.
Exactly. The other multiple objective would be, the Water Action Plan. One of the central pillars of that is making water conservation a way of life. And so there's investments in our cap and trade proposal that would encourage, that would fund water and energy savings projects that result in less energy used, therefore result in GHG reductions, but by reducing water, makes us more resilient to dealing with reduced snowpack and reducing demands on water. So we did try to design the cap and trade plan with resiliency as a co-benefit to look at.
Right. And then lastly, Chairwoman, you had made mention of the waste streams of methane. And one issue I've been dealing with Senator Hill and others in recent years are the impacts of fugitive methane emissions, different from the waste streams. And are we and can we accurately currently measure fugitive methane emissions, and are our utilities able to? And then lastly, can we determine in any broad sense of how large the component of our overall greenhouse gas emissions are coming from fugitive methane emissions?
I think the most accurate way that I could respond is to say that we're improving the accuracy of our measurements, but I don't think that anybody in the scientific and technical community is comfortable that we have an exact number that would parallel, let's say, the kind of emissions inventory that we could do based on what's coming out of a smokestack or out of a tailpipe. We don't have that kind of measurements.
And that's a technological need at this point?
There are improved leak detection and measurement technologies out there, some of which are now being deployed. I hate to say it, but the Aliso Canyon disaster is a great science project. In addition to its other aspects, it's provided an opportunity for people to deploy some new equipment that hadn't been used before and test it out and compare.
But aside from these reservoirs, I'm thinking of our existing gas pipeline infrastructure.
Exactly. We need to look beyond just the field, absolutely. But there is a new technology emerging, which is being tested, and some of it is being used. I believe in the regulations that you're going to see coming out this year from both the PUC and the Air Resources Board is going to be a much greater reliance on those improved techniques and requiring the owners of these facilities to do a much more thorough job of evaluating. We don't know at this point, though, the ultimate extent of this problem, and we really don't know yet, I think, what the most cost-effective way of dealing with it is, because we've obviously got miles and miles of old pipelines out there, which we've taken for granted, but which we use. And so figuring out kind of what the best way to get ahead of the problem is still under discussion.
And should those emissions be considered as a responsibility of those utilities who are emitting? Right now, we're not counting that in their greenhouse gas emissions, are we?
Not to my knowledge. I should check on that. Because there is a factor in there, I believe, but the question is it adequate? Is it sufficient?
So at some point, it becomes a matter of responsibility and consequence. Thank you.
I wanted to just get two clarifications here. First of all, on the expenditure plan that was not finalized for last year, is the intent of the administration to wait as part of the June budget package, last year's and going forward, or can it would be, I would be very supportive of doing something sooner than later as far as last year's plan, getting it out the door in the next month or so, separate and distinct from the 2016-17 budget.